Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy podcast. Each week, we expose the faulty foundational mindsets of the past and rebuild a newer, stronger foundation essential in creating your meaningful legacy. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get started. As much as you like this podcast, I'm certain that you're going to love the book that I just released on Amazon, Fuel Your Legacy, The 9 Pillars to Build a Meaningful Legacy. I wrote this to share with you the experiences that I had while I was identifying my identity, how I began to create my meaningful legacy, and how you can create yours. You're going to find this book on Kindle, Amazon, and as always on my website, samknickerbocker.com. Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy show. And today we have a wonderful guest and friend on the podcast. Met him on social media, I think, just was reaching out to different people, or no, actually, I think I met him in a networking group, and just trying to get to know people. Recently moved down to Arizona, just trying to get to know other business owners and professionals down here, and got matched up with Clifford. And honestly, I could not have been more excited to meet him. I met multiple people out of that, but out of all the people I met during that process, Clifford is the one that's just like, man, him and I align. What he's teaching, what he's done. He's maybe a little bit more adventurous than I am from a what he's done perspective, but why he does what he does, I think, is right on and in alignment with me. And that's why I invited him on. After talking to him, I said, hey, we need to get you on the podcast to share your story, because it's absolutely incredible. So he's a competitive edge specialist. He helps people really with their mind, body, and spirit, help them connect those, bring them into alignment so they can achieve their goals and their dreams. Sometimes that's in the physical aspect, which he'll talk about. And it could just be business goals or business, like accomplishing, essentially winning at the highest level in life, because you can, like you don't need a bigger reason other than because I can to win at life. And that's what I love so much about Clifford's message, and why I invited him in here to chat about, leadership, habit building, mental and physical exercises to just win and be successful. So with that, Clifford, thank you so much for coming on. I'm super stoked to play a different type of interview. Our previous conversation was good, just getting to know each other. But it's time for the gridiron, right? We're going to grill you about your success and how can we learn from the things that you've accomplished. So go for us and tell us about your story and where you started and how you got to where you are and some of the things you've accomplished along the way.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So I'll say my journey was an interesting one from the get. And I want to remind everybody that their journey is interesting, and there's always going to be a turning point, and they need to figure out whether they're going to take a left or take a right. And so when I was 4, my biological dad had drove away. Didn't see him again until I was 39, actually. But yeah, he drove away, and I had an idea that he wasn't coming back. And from there, I remember thinking to myself, people who are supposed to be there can leave your life. They can just drive out of your life. At the age of 5, I never forget, this moment really stuck with me, because I remember being in the hospital and no one was quite telling me what was going on. I remember my uncle carrying me out of the hospital room, and I'm just like wondering what the heck is going on. And fast forward, my grandfather ends up passing away. I remember looking in the coffin, knowing that was going to be me one day, knowing one day that I would die, and not knowing what's on the other side. We come from a religious background, but no one's ever rushing to get to that place. And so I didn't know I was doing it at the time. I coached myself through that process and realized that we get a choice. We can either live as much life as possible, or we can not know when we're going to die, freak out about it the entire time, and then end up dying. That's the punchline. So I was like, I'm going to live as much life as I can. I'm going to see how much I can take on this journey. And then when I was 6, my mom remarried, and this guy, to this day, he's my dad. He stood by me. He stood for me, and he believed in me, and he nurtured me in the best way that he could. And I bring the best way that he could because you talk about people realizing they need to make their own decisions. I bring up their own decisions because everyone's going to make decisions for us. They're going to know what is best for us. They're going to know what we're supposed to do and why we're supposed to do it. And my dad's given me so many amazing lessons along with my mom on my journey. But one lesson he gave me very, very early on is take responsibility. Take responsibility for the consequences that happen in your life, both good and bad. And I really, really held on to that lesson. And within holding on to that, I was free to always make the decisions that I wanted to make. And freedom is a very interesting thing because even though we have the freedom of choice, we're always going to weigh on what we know, on the awareness that we're at. So if we have a limited amount of awareness and we think we only have 2 or 3 choices, and there's a million choices out there, in our head, we only have 2 to 3 choices because that's the reality that we've put ourselves into. And so I bring this up because one thing that I did do on my journey specifically was I went to college. I went to college because my parents wanted me to go to college. And luckily I got into something that I still do to this day. It's kinesiology. And I started as a personal trainer and I transitioned into my fighting career and now coaching. But going through that process, my parents were very proud of me for being a college graduate. I graduated at ASU. And I have had a very nice career as an athlete. You know, as a wrestler, academically, I did well. I was good in football. I was good in track and field. But what made things so interesting as I ventured out even more was I loved having challenges. I loved challenging myself because when I did challenge myself, I grew into something new. I always grew into something different. I was always transformed from the challenge that I took on. And when I went into fighting, my parents did not want me to do it. Not even a little bit. Like walking inside of a cage to get punched and kicked, not for their kid. You know, it was their kid. And no matter how old I get, I'm always going to be their kid to them. And I get it. You know, any parent, you understand, you love your kids, you want to protect your kids, and you want to take care of them. But that's what I wanted to do. And I was willing to take the consequences of doing so. It was very interesting because I remember how my mom and my dad would try and talk me out of things, you know? And for any parent who has, or any person who gets old enough and looks back at their parents, you start realizing the games that they play, right? Within whatever they play them in. And how they can attempt to convince you and guide you and move you into what they want to kind of convince and guide and move you into. And there's that point where you just have to say, like, this is my life and this is what I'm going to do with it. And it's such an empowering feeling, but it's scary too. Because the second you take a leap into what you really want to do, there's going to be barriers that you have to break through. And each barrier you break through, you gain more momentum in becoming more and more of who you were meant to be. And so when I took up my fighting career, I learned so much along that journey. You know, I've used my fighting journey on my entrepreneurial journey that I'm going through right now, and every other challenge that I will tend to go through because life has a ton of them. It's going to throw you some of the most interesting challenges along the way. But when I'm getting ready to walk into my cage, it's the scariest, most empowering feeling ever. Like, it feels so amazing to know that I'm getting ready to walk into the cage and this is about to be closed and I know what's going down. I signed a contract. I trained my ass off. I did the things that I needed to do, and it's time. It's game time. It's time to do what we need to do. And so I go through that process, and there's a winner and a loser, if you want to perceive it as such. I always say there's a winner and a winner. There's the winner who gets his hand raised, and the winner who learns a lesson. I like being the winner who gets my hand raised personally, but sometimes I was the other winner, the one learning a lesson along the way and figuring out what actions to take next time so I could get my hand raised. And going through that process, it was such a euphoric experience because whenever I tested myself, I got to see who I was. Every test I took, I got to see a little bit more of who is Clifford Starks? Who's Clifford going to be under stressful situations? Who's Clifford going to be when he is the winner? You know, am I going to be arrogant? Am I going to be cocky? Am I going to be a good person? I'm going to do right by people. I always feel it's the best to be humble, do right by people, care for people. But you don't know who you are until you're tested in that situation. So go put yourself in situations and see how you show up. And if you don't like what you see, make adjustments. And if you do like what you see, enjoy that process, enjoy that experience. And so all throughout my fighting career, you know, I ended up doing some amazing things on that journey. I ended up fighting in the UFC. I fought in Bellator. I got to fight at the highest stage. It was so awesome to set out for something and actually obtain it. It was interesting. A lot of people talk about what they want to do. And I say, if talk got things done, then everyone would have six packs and they'd be millionaires. And the truth is, talk doesn't get it done. You know, it's that visceral feeling. It's that taking the action. It's that getting up in times you don't want to get up, doing the things that you need to do, even on the days you don't want to do them, and knowing there's a bigger picture that you're going after, knowing there's a North Star that you're going after. And so as I progressed in my journey, I ended up walking away from the sport, and I walked away from it because I became a dad. You know, I became a dad and it just wasn't worth it to me the same. The consequences weren't worth it to me. And so I walked the other direction and went into entrepreneurship, which in my head was easier than fighting was going to be, but I learned very quickly it's just as hard, just in different avenue. It's you're getting reps in something completely different, and you're having fun getting those reps in something completely different. And I say having fun because we get to choose the attitude that we have with the actions that we're taking on. And there's this process of continually learning and continually growing and continually understanding and getting results. And I say and getting results because results are the necessary, like those, that's the glue to being what you truly want to be in this world. I help vision-driven entrepreneurs along their journey now to help them get the success that they're looking to get. And one thing that I noticed, when we care about people, we almost care so much that we can enable them instead of allowing them to show up as truly and authentically as they were meant to show up as. And in life, there is figuring out, what does alignment mean to you? I ask people the question, what do you dream about? What do you love to do? And what do you hate to do? And why? You know, what is your dream? What do you love? What do you hate? And why? Because when you can understand that and start unpacking those things, you realize just how many opportunities you have to get the things that you want on your journey. And so one thing Sam was talking about is, when are you going to step out of someone's shadow and go do the things that you want to do on your journey? And on my journey, I want my kids, for instance, I have a 5-year-old and an 8-month-old right now, and I want them to live their journey. And I'm going to guide them and protect them because that's my job. It's my job to protect. I am their father. But there's also going to come that time where they're going to have to make their own decisions. And they're not always going to align with me. And they might not even align with my beliefs. But what I want to do is grow them into a position to be their own men and to show up the way that they want to show up and light the world on fire. And they might not want to do that. I don't know. It's their choice. And so with my message, the greatness within message, it's to remind you that you are the creator of your reality. Always have been and you always will be. But we can only know as much as we know. We can only know as much as we're aware of. And when our reality is constantly being created through the lens that we're looking through, we can look at, well, I don't have this opportunity, I don't have that opportunity, or how do I do that? I go into a very abundant space. And my abundant space is, if I had a magic wand and you could have everything you wanted, what would that be? And start with talking about it. But remember, I say talk is cheap, because it is. You can talk about it all day long that you want. Talk about it with intention. Talk about it with intention. Get ready to take the actions that you need to on your journey. And get excited about it. You're getting ready to identify as something completely different. The second you rip it off and say, I want this, and say it with conviction. I want to be this, or I want to do that. I look back at where I've gone and what I've been. I wanted to be a fighter, and I got it. I got to become what I wanted to be. But I only knew what I knew. And now I know more. So now I know, wait a minute, I can influence people and lots of them along the way. I get to be an influence. I get to help others along their journey. And I continue to help me along my journey as well. And not only that, I get to see how deep this rabbit hole really goes. Because we all want pretty much the same thing. And we want them in a different order and in a different way. But we want relationships. We want our health. And we want to be wealthy. And wealthy to each person is going to be different. And when you can know, what does that mean to you? Well, I want the relationship with this specific person because of this. Awesome. When we get intentional, life starts showing up. Health. I want to be this healthy so I can do this. Awesome. When we get intentional, life starts showing up. And the same thing with wealth. I want this amount of money so that I can do this. Awesome. When we get intentional, life shows up. And one thing that I've always focused on is being as intentional as I can on my journey. And the other thing that I've learned as I've gone deeper and deeper into my journey, I learned to be even more intentional in my process. Because you can't know all the tricks and tips and strategies and tactics and principles when you're born. You're just a kid. And as you're going through your process and you're learning and you're taking things in and you're absorbing things, just realize you've absorbed the same thing year in and year out, probably. And if you're going to continue to absorb the same thing year in and year out, you're going to be jaded to certain things. So all I say is look in the mirror and know how amazing you are, know how great you are, know how much abilities you have, and challenge yourself. Say, maybe I want this, something no one's ever seen. Because I'm sure you have an idea maybe no one's ever heard about. And someone has to get that out there. Hopefully it's you. So that's my story. Greatness within.
I love it. Thank you so much. Normally I only get like a quarter or half page of notes, but I've got 2 full pages here. So nice. I know we won't be able to get to all of it, which is slightly disheartening, but it's also good because that means we can have you on again. Or if people want to reach out to you, then they can reach out to you, right? So I'm going to have to cherry pick some of this, but let's go back to like the very first thing you started out with. I think it's so crucial that people understand human nature is that we try to actually downplay our own story and make our own story not seem as meaningful or seem to justify that somebody else's story is more meaningful because it seems like it would be harder for me to go through their story than my own story, right? So then we become grateful for our story. Now, that's a cool thing about human nature is that we can become grateful that our story is not as bad as the next guy, right? The downside is when we start to compare and say they have more right to be happy or sad or successful or poor or whatever because their story is worse than ours or better than ours, right? And the reality is everybody's story is uniquely theirs, and it was as difficult as it was for them, and they experienced it uniquely all by themselves. I grew up, when I speak on stage, I used to speak a lot about this. I've kind of since transformed my message a little bit more based on my audience, but I'm the 7th of 11 kids, and we all grew up very much there's different eras for sure of our family, but we all grew up and life was not great for many of us growing up. So even for my brother that's just older than me and my sister just younger than me, although our experiences were very similar, as in the actual events that were happening in our lives, the circumstances we were in, they were very similar. All 3 of us walked away with entirely different perspectives and experiences of those events and circumstances. So the reason I share that is because everybody's journey is interesting and it is uniquely theirs, no matter what. And there is a fork in the road. Yours happened much younger than I would say mine happened, right? My fork in my road, the first one that I was very, very conscious of was probably 11 or 12 years old. Maybe even younger, but I would say 11 or 12 years old. And that was when I decided, I don't know where I got this source information. It's so funny as kids, we get source information, we make decisions and choose into identities about ourselves without even really knowing whether or where the source information came from. But I remember hearing that 4 out of every 10 people who were religious would eventually not be religious anymore. Okay, and there's 13 people in my family. So with this statistic, I was like, okay, well, at least 4, 5, 6 of us are gone then, statistically, right? And I don't like to argue with statistics. Sometimes you try and defy the odds, but statistically, half of our family is going to stop believing in God or stop having as that type of relationship with them. So at a young age, I had made a decision. No, that's not going to be me, even though at the time my life was in nowhere close to what I would consider alignment with godly principles or actions or behaviors. I made a decision at that young age. I was going to choose to believe in God to the best of my ability, right? And since then, the statistics in our family have played out, and it's been about 5 or 6 people who have decided that there's no needed relationship. Okay, so, but it's funny that the people that I thought never would have been the ones to leave were generally the people who actually did end up leaving or stopping to believe in God. So you have these forks in your roads. I had another fork in my road when I was 13 or 14 years old. And these forks, they're always going to come. And it's not one fork and then you're done, right? If only, right? But it's a constant stream of forks. So tell us a little bit more about this, right? You're at 4 years old, your dad drives away. And you don't see him again till, you said 29? 39, even longer, 39, okay? So you don't see him again for 25 years. What was that conversation like? Obviously, you had grown by the time you're 39 years old. You've done a lot of internal development and growth yourself and tried to make understanding of it. You've already started a family yourself. So You now have greater perspective of how hard relationships can be, how hard parenting can be. You now have greater understanding. How is that conversation coming back into, hey, I'm going to see my dad 25 years later, and the last real memory that I have of this guy is him, it basically taillights him leaving me and my mom. So what was that?
Yeah.
Meeting again? What was that like?
Yeah. So it was empowering for me because I had already unpacked it and put it into, I made peace with it. You know, I had the opportunity to make peace with it. But what was really, really nice was when we did talk, I allowed him to have space to share what he wanted to share. You know, there was no yelling or bad mouthing or saying you should have or you could have, or I was appreciative of what he did in his journey. And I always wish him the very best, you know, on his process and his journey. And so, yeah, it was empowering because I was able to, just how I say, it's about the action. It's not about like, all right, be a bigger person and show your character and show that you're going to be this way. You can't know. You can't know until you're in it. And when I was in it, it felt peaceful for me, you know, and I was there for him, and it was a really great feeling for me.
So let's further this, because you're a mindset and business coach, and any experience of mine would say that mindset, business always goes into relationship and faith. Just like they're all intertwined and connected at one level or another. Now, how deeply and how much connected, that's going to be vary from person to person. That being said, this is an unpopular opinion, and I don't know what the right answer is. And I don't know that there is a right answer, but there's feelings, right? I was grateful enough and fortunate enough that my parents stayed together my whole life. They're still together, and our family was never taken away or deconstructed by the state because of the abuse and stuff going on. So I consider myself fortunate in that regard, that even though my younger years were not great, now we can look back and everybody loves each other and everybody's kind, and we've all moved past it. We've all grown past it, even though the younger childhood is not as great. That being said, I think there's a level where sometimes the right thing to do, and when I say the right thing for your dad in that moment was to leave rather than stay and create a worse situation. So I'm curious what your thought process is on that, having gone through it as a child, having your dad walk out on you and your mom, and then also building that relationship back on the backside and gaining further understanding about why he may have done what he did. Mm-hmm. Do you think that somebody should stay in a situation they feel like they've already checked out of duty and responsibility? Or is it sometimes a better option to just get out regardless of the potential pain you may cause other people? You got to do what's right for you first. And it's a delicate line, and I don't know that there's one right answer for everybody, but I'm just curious. You have a unique perspective of having been somebody who has left and having rebuilt that relationship.
Yeah. So I guess my answer to that, I mean, great question, is be a person who's willing to live with the consequences that you create. So a person gets the option to leave or to stay, and it's important to get everyone's feelings on board in the best way possible, if that makes sense. Like, just really understand where everyone's at on their piece and on their journey. Now, he drove away and there was no conversation, and I was a 4-year-old kid. So he could have been thinking like, oh, he's only 4, it's not going to affect him. Or he could be thinking, oh, he's 4, I don't want to affect him too much. I don't know what I don't know what he was thinking, because he really didn't have that conversation with me. I do feel conversation's important to have with people. I feel it can help with closure. But with what you said, life is complicated. It really is, and we all were doing the best that we could in the moment that we did it. Like, I don't think he had malice in his head saying, ooh, I'm going to do this. Like, I think it was a process that happened, and it's dealing with all of those delicate consequences for the process that is partaken. So my answer is, if you are able to look yourself in the mirror, honestly, take that action, but then ask yourself the question, well, why am I taking the action that I'm taking?
Mm-hmm. No, I love that. I think that's like the best answer that could be given is, can you are you going to be confidently okay with the consequences? There's some times where you're not in love with any of the consequences, right? But understanding that the consequences are going to happen, and that's where that responsibility and accountability comes from. These are the consequences. You get to deal with it. And some of the consequences are that you got to meet the man who you do call your dad, who is a great leader, and had that whole circumstance not happen, you probably would never have known that guy.
Yeah.
Right. And so the consequences, I think it's important to look at all the good and the bad consequences. The reason I bring this up, and I know it's delicate and you don't want to bring up old feelings all the time, but this is happening every day. There's people who are in relationships, for lack of a better word. I just call them relationships, with their jobs, with their employers, with their bosses, with their spouses, with their children, with their cousins, with their neighbors, with their political party. And we are in a scenario where we are in tons of relationships. Our country just did something crazy, from my perspective, crazy, on the world stage, where they walked out. Like, literally, they said bye and they walked out. And whether that was the right decision or not, it doesn't even matter at this point, because it's done. And there's going to be consequences, and there is fallout, and all that's going to happen. And the fact is, it happened. And based on somebody's decision about what was best at the time, that's what happened. Now, what their motivations were, why it was best, we may not ever fully understand that and be able to understand what's going on in their head. But the point is, each of you who are listening to this, you're in a scenario at somewhere in your life where sometimes the decision might be best to walk away, even though there may be some unintended consequences that happen. And we have to decide on a daily basis, do we stay or do we go? And my opinion is, from an accountability perspective, if you're staying in a situation that you wouldn't prefer, we'll say it that way, wouldn't prefer, then you're choosing to do that. And you shouldn't complain about it. If you're underpaid, shouldn't complain about it. If you're not treated well in your relationship, shouldn't complain about it, right? You are choosing to stay there. And at some point in time, you will either choose to get out, or you will make the conscious choice to stay in. And you need to be able to live with the consequences of both staying or leaving, whatever the decision is. And I think that's a huge part of development. If we were to fast forward into your fighting career, what was your initial thought? Like, I knew you grew up wrestling. You wrestled in college, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So you get out of college, you got your degree. Why did you choose to go into fighting, right? Like, what drew you into, hey, I'm going to go be a fighter all of a sudden, just for fun or just to challenge myself?
So we live in a world of an opportunity to thrive or survive. Like, if your bills aren't coming in, if your bills aren't getting paid, if you're not eating, if you're homeless, if you're lacking water, that's a survival state. It's a state of survival. What if you could thrive in your survive? And so fighting, you don't know what's going to happen. And so just off of what you said is, I chose to be in this situation, right? So I chose to put myself in a potentially compromising situation with another athlete who could either be my level or superior to my level, bigger, stronger, faster than me. has those possibilities to be that. And saying like, okay, who am I going to be when I show up? Like, who am I going to show up as? In front of a bunch of people. Like, that's a spot where, what if you're losing? Then what are you going to do? What if it's not working for you? Then what are you going to do? And I love it because it's in a safe enough space, because it's professional fighting. You know, it's professional fighting. And I say the fighter is the primal space. And then there's a professional in that, where we are doing something that is very primal, very primitive, but we're doing it as professionals. And in life, you're going to have primal states and states where you can be a professional. So we can go back to the relationship thing, and yeah, relationships are easy when everything's going well. Like when there's nothing bad happening, then yeah, they go really good. What about when they're not? What about when your kids are yelling? What about when you're sleep deprived? What about when you're hungry? What about all of those things? Who are you going to show up as? And so that was the ultimate test for me, to say, ooh, I get to step in my cage and see who the hell I am. And if it's not who I like to be, I can adjust it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I want to talk about, because one of the notes that I wrote down is, well, there's two things here. One, we talk about freedom. We talk about getting freedom, either in a political sense, a religious sense, a spiritual sense, a financial sense, whatever it is. But the reality is your freedom is limited to your awareness. So we've got to actually have freedom, we have to get educated. We have to hear the other aspects of the argument. And part of those arguments are in ourselves. We have to push ourselves to our limits in these different areas to see what we would want to actually change or edit, for lack of a better word, of our habits. And one of the things that I wrote down is, what's your fighting cage, right? He went into an actual fighting cage. Some of your fighting cages is, how can you expand the limits of your musical ability? How can you expand the limits of your writing ability? How can you expand the limits of your photography? How can you expand the limits of your parenting or being a child? Not necessarily a child, or maybe a child. If you're an adult and you didn't have a childhood, this is my case. I have to intentionally say, okay, I'm going to go in and try and imagine it, have an imagination, and play with my 3-year-old child, because it doesn't come naturally to me. That's a cage where it's like, oh, it's so easy to stay in my phone. So I have to force myself out of that into this cage of engaging with a 3-year-old and saying, how long can I keep him engaged? Like, that's a battle, guys. Like, how long can you keep your child engaged with you and in the conversation? So it doesn't matter where the cage is. The question is, are you intentionally putting yourself in a cage to find out how you can respond? And I think that many people are scared to do that. And they have reasons that, well, I should say they have reasons. We'll call them reasons or excuses, whatever. In this situation, they're interchangeable. They have experiences that would say it's better not to put myself in the cage. Okay. Yeah. So when you have your family members and your wife eventually telling you, hey, probably don't get in that cage, there's plenty of other things you could do. You've got a degree. You could, like, why did you say no? You know, it's important for me to be in this cage, not just for me, but for the people who watch me do this. It's important for everybody that we have these cages in our lives and it's on public display and they get to see this caged experience.
Yeah. So I couldn't completely answer it when I was in it. It was something that I experienced more and more when I was out of it. One, I will say I was following my heart. I was following what felt right to do. You know, it felt like the right story for who Clifford Starks was. And I always loved people, always super kind. It was interesting. That kind of throws people off a little bit because they're like, you punch people in the face. They go, yeah, but we're both signing an agreement. You know, it's not like I'm just randomly hauling off and punching someone in the face. Like, there was we agreed, this is how we're going to compete. and this is the rules of the game. And so to me, that's the ultimate form of kindness. Physicality can be kind depending on the situation and the circumstance. So having the combination of being a fighter, being able to express myself in that aspect, and also being able to express myself in other aspects when I walk in the cage and when I walk out of the cage. I get the opportunity to say, who am I? And question and see. But my real answer is, yeah, it was just in my heart to do it. I just wanted to, like when I first started it, I just wanted to see if I was even any good. I couldn't have known until I stepped into the cage. And I stepped in and I'm like, oh, I'm not bad at this game.
So how did you go from, so you're in there, right? And you decided, hey, I'm just going to find out, right? And again, I think this cage analogy really does apply to everything in your life. So if you're not thinking about this, thinking about your cages, and sometimes going and finding cages that you're no good at, or you don't think you'd be good at, or whatever, and intentionally stepping into the cage just to find out, right? But you finally get into the cage, right? You're willing to try something out. You step out, leap of faith into this unknown, to a degree, unknown world. I mean, you've been in wrestling for years at this point, so you understood grappling or like a mode of that, but you're stepping out into this, and then you see this goal of the UFC, which is pretty much the highest level of professional fighting in that modality that you could be in. Okay. And you say, hey, I want to get there in like 6 to 9 months. And your trainer, your coach, he doubts it. He just says, no, I don't think that's possible. How did you mentally say, no, I'm going to do it? And then what was the consequence of you making this decision in your mind?
Oh, yeah. So one thing that I did not mention, I've always had confidence. I've always had it. And my mom actually instilled it in me even more. So I am extremely, extremely confident in myself and my abilities. With that being said, I'm confident and I am also humble and I'm grounded. So when my coach, like I wanted to get in less than a year, and he's just judging me with his little grin and smiling at me. And the next day he tells me how there's like no way this is happening. And I take it in. I take things in because it's important to take it in, especially when you're taking it in from someone who's helped so many others get into the UFC. But you can't run by what other people's beliefs are, because then you'll never see who you can be or what you can experience or even accomplish. They talk about the banner effect, and I didn't even know this when I was going through my process, but I'm going to do what I want to do. And then we'll just see what happens. Like, that's all I got is, well, we'll see. Because the second it is done by someone, all of a sudden, like, yeah, anyone can do it because such and such did it. So that's the cool part of it. So even when I talk about I'm extremely confident, it's not like me, I'm so confident. It's if one of us can do it, it means it can be done. That's all that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So then you decide you're going to do it. How long did it actually take you from when you decided to do it? Because you said, hey, I want to get in there a year. How many months did it actually take you to get into the UFC?
10 months. I'll tell you, Trevor was like, how did we do that? So that made it very fun.
And this is what's interesting. Once you set your mind to something, once you put yourself in a cage, you say, I'm going to do my absolute best to do this. In my experience, it often happens faster than you think you thought possible initially.
Oh, yeah.
Once you make a decision, then it can happen even faster than you thought initially. And part of that is something else you said that I just want to highlight here, is that there's a winner and a winner, right? One winner gets their hand raised and the other winner learns a lesson. And I don't know if you know who Brad Lee is, but he says something all the time that I think is great. He says, would you rather be given the opportunity to go make $1 million or be given $10 million?
Mm-hmm.
Right? He asks his guests on his podcast this often. And they say, oh, I'd rather go learn how to make $1 million than be given 10 million.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, you're an idiot. I'm certain that you can learn more from losing 10 million than you will ever possibly learn from making 1 million.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So what's funny is the real winner in a lot of these circumstances is the person who's learning the lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
True.
there are people like Tom. I would put Tom Brady in this category, Michael Jordan, like the best of the best of the best. They go in and they completely destroy at their job. Like they win from the scoreboard, from the perspective of the scoreboard. They are the victor of the championship or of the competition, and yet they walk out of it thinking all they can think about is all the areas that they need to improve on to be better the next time. Right. So there's a way to be a victor with the raised hand and the winner who learned the lesson. Right. But
absolutely,
if you're the loser, you could be the winner who's also a loser. Right. You could get your hand raised for whatever reason, but still lose the overall competition because you didn't think about, well, how could I do better next time? And so I think that that's an important aspect. No matter, again, this goes back to every area of our lives. And the reason I keep bringing it into every area of your life is, for me, there's 5 pillars to build a meaningful legacy, right? Mm-hmm. Your faith, your family, your fitness, your finance, and your fun. And if you haven't learned how to be exceptional in every one of those, then there's still growth. And even once you're exceptional, then you've obviously reached that level. What's the next step? And so I'm constantly pushing myself in these different areas. And I think that these rules that Clifford lives his life by, they're applicable in all areas: faith, family, fitness, finance, and fun. Right now, we're talking specifically about his career and the sport, even more specifically. But the rules and the concepts and the principles, they're absolutely applicable to every part of somebody's life.
Yeah, big time.
So you switched out of that, you went into business. How are you mentioned, well, you thought it might be maybe not as hard to be in the entrepreneurial space, but now you're finding out it's just as hard, just a different hard. And it's almost like starting over. A lot of times people think, oh, I'm going to just walk into this other thing. I'm already a champion in this other aspect of my life. I'm going to walk in and be just as good in this new field. And sometimes it's true. Sometimes people are really quick at transferring their success. But other times it takes a while to build that up. So what's been the hardest thing as you've been building up your coaching career? What's been the hardest thing that you've had to consistently, as far as like a habit change, what's been the hardest thing so far?
So I have a real love for people, and I really like helping people and guiding people through their journey. So the coaching process, it was really, really difficult to niche down, to figure that piece out. Because I felt like, well, everybody needs what I have. Like everybody needs it. And it's like, it's not what they need, it's what they want. Like, do they want it? Because everybody needs health. Like, truthfully speaking, like we want to live as long as we can and have as healthy of a body as we could. But is that what we really want? And some people will be like, yeah, that is what I want. Like, was it really, really what you want? Because if you're eating certain foods that are not healthy for you, then it's not as much it's not important enough. Like, that's how I kind of look at it. So doing that transition of understanding, like, okay, who wants what I have? Who specifically wants what I have? And why would they want it?
Yeah. And then how are they going to actually receive it? It's interesting that I've been preparing another speech for a conference I'm speaking at. And it really is going down to, I'm going to be talking about opportunity cost. And every day, everything that we do, we're making decisions. And by making a decision one way, we're ultimately basically cutting off our ability to do some other activity with our time, our money, our resources, whatever it is. And so I have my ideal client that I'm trying to help. How do I create, like, you have 2 questions. If you can't ask somebody and get somebody's attention in the 2 questions, then you probably lost their attention. You lost the sale already. You lost the connection, right? You lost, if you didn't look good and say the right thing on a date, you lost the date. You lost the influence over your child. You lost whatever it is. So you got 2 questions. So I've been like crunching, like, I've got like 4 questions that would be a great lead, like starting into a conversation that would help somebody, but I've got to get these 4 questions, the idea, and I've got to get somebody from point A to point B instead of in 4 questions, in 2 questions, so it's like constantly pushing to find what are those 2 questions. And it does come down to, like, are you looking for freedom from something or freedom to do something?
Yeah.
And then if you can identify that in the first question, then you have to identify next, well, what happens if you don't get it? Like, what if you don't? And that's where that why starts to come in. Yeah, you might think you want health. Okay, well, what happens if you don't get health? Sometimes you get a more clarity out of what you want by asking yourself, what don't you want? Or what happens if you don't get what you think you want? And that sometimes will give you the motivation or the inspiration to go actually get what it is you're chasing.
So, absolutely.
I love it. And the last thing, oh man, there's just too much. I'm like we're running out of time, but I love this, right? I'm a deeply spiritual person, and I really believe wholeheartedly in God, and I respect him and pray to him, and all of the things that I can do to deepen my relationship with him. And that being said, okay, because some people will find these 2 things contradictory. Well, in my mind, I think they're the same. And so I don't know how I understand if you were raised a certain way, why you think it's contradictory, but I don't think it's contradictory. And that is, like, you are the creator of your world, right? Sometimes we spend so much time focusing on praying to God or praying to whatever, or thinking about somebody else is going to change our circumstance, rather than just accepting that we are the creators of our world. We are creators. We are the creators of our relationship, our health, and our wealth. And the sooner we start to take accountability and responsibility for being the creators of our existence, that's when my life started to change and started to appear the way I wanted it to be. Rather than waiting for somebody else to do it, I started saying, okay, I'm the creator. I get to actually imagine with my magic wand, what do I want my future to be?
Yeah.
In your coaching, how do you help somebody realize or come to that realization and conviction that they get to be their own creator?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my coaching is customized, but I do know this. If I get a person feeling clear, confident, and committed in what they want, they start creating the reality that they want. So I got to get them really clear on what it is that they're specifically going after. And confidence, everyone has a different form that what makes them confident. But our physiology, like when we're feeling good about life, if we get a nice little exercise in, if our chest is up, if we're standing tall and proud, that can build confidence. If we take an action that we're a little bit nervous or unsure about, and we ended up getting through it and doing better than we thought, that can give us confidence. Just even doing it, even if we do it and we suck at it, but we did it, that can give us confidence. And then just being committed to the process, having them sign in a contract saying, I am committed to this process because I'm committed to me.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that it's 3 C's, 4 C's really. So it's clear, confident, committed to become a creator.
Yeah.
And I'm, again, if you've listened to me on my podcast or you've met me in person, you know that if there's one, like, my deepest, corest belief about humans and life and myself and you and everybody that I meet, is that you are the creator of your existence. When I first realized that, I was about 14, 15 years old. And it was the most harrowing, dreadful, terrifying realization ever. Like I literally, when I realized it, I was like, I just want to die. Right? And that sounds like maybe melodramatic, but like for me, I was in a very not good place when I realized that. And I had to accept that exactly where I was mentally, spiritually, physically, my habits that I had created, all that was a result of me creating that. And that's a lot when you're like at your lowest of lows, and then you get the realization that you're at the lowest of your lows all due to yourself. You can't blame it on anybody else. Like once you realize you can't blame it on anybody else, it's like probably the most disheartening thing. The initial realization is the most disheartening thing. The cool thing is once you realize it and you fully accept it, right, there's a realization that sucks. Once you fully accept it though, it's honestly, in my opinion, one of the most liberating things, because now once you've accepted that you were the one who got you to where you are in the crappy situation, then by nature of accepting that, you're also accepting that you are the one who can get you out of it.
Amen.
And the creating of the
life Sam,
is the acceptance.
I apologize. I do have to get going because I have a 1 o'clock.
No, you're good. But I super appreciate you coming on. And we can where do we find you at?
Clifford Starks 1@gmail.com, and you can find my website at Clifford or mindbodymentoring.com, and also Facebook Messenger.
Facebook Messenger. Love it.
Awesome.
Mindbodymentoring.com. Go and check it out. Thank you guys. Thank you, Clifford. Thanks for joining us. If what you heard today resonates with you, please like, comment, and share on social media. Tag me. And if you do give me a shout out, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Thanks to all of those who've left a review. It helps spread the message of what it takes to build a legacy that lasts. And we'll catch you next time on Fuel Your Legacy.